Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moppet coming at you again with another APUSH video, taking a look at topic 7.8, 1920s cultural and political controversies. Now, previously we talked about the impact of prohibition on life in the 1920s. Another aspect of life that is going to be defining life in the 1920s are issues dealing with immigration, nativism, and racism. We've mentioned previously that, we saw, following the end of World War I and, a rash of strikes breaking out across America's factories organized by labor unions, there was this really noticeable, not just anti-union sentiment, but also anti-immigrant sentiment. And that is going to define the 1920s throughout that decade. Nativists are going to be fearing that, many of the same tropes that you always see with nativists, immigrants are coming to steal our jobs, they don't really respect democracy, they have different cultural values than the quote-unquote typical American, they mean waspish American. There was also the fear of that many of these nativists were political radicals, that they were inspiring the unions to be going on strike. And so you saw that there's going to be a visceral reaction to this. And, not unlike what we saw in previous examples, like the Chinese Exclusion Act, for example, we're going to see a pretty noticeable nativist, if not racist, attitude towards immigration in this decade. In many respects, this is going to be embodied in what are going to be known as the Quota Acts. The Quota Acts of 1921 and 1924 collectively are going to have a very big lasting impact on what immigration is going to look like for the United States into the future, and really for the next 40 plus years, actually. The main goal for the Quota Acts was to reduce the overall amount of immigration coming into the United States. These folks that are in charge of Congress at the time, they feel there's been too much change going on in America, and that immigration rates, which had been at all-time highs, were a major cause for that. So they wanted immigration rates to come down. But note, it's not just reducing overall immigration. They made a concerted effort to tailor the immigration to what they believed are, well, in their own minds, the best immigrants, the most adaptable immigrants. And here's what we mean by that. We see in these laws a clear distinction between those that came over in earlier waves of immigration versus those that came over in later waves. And the way that the laws are actually written is that they were going to be taking a look at the immigration rates from countries going back into the 19th century, earlier 19th century, and that's where the term Quota Act comes from. So what they basically did is they picked a census year much, much earlier, I believe it was 1890, and they basically said that whatever the proportion was of immigrants then would now be the legal proportion of immigrants now. With the idea being is that they wanted more of the quote-unquote older immigrants than more recent immigrants in terms of nation of origin. So what does this do? It does minimal to reduce the number of immigrants that came over from countries like England, France, Germany, Scandinavia, Belgium, the Netherlands, even Ireland. But it had a major impact on those that wanted to come here from Southern and Eastern Europe and Asia. So you're talking about Italians and Greeks and Russians and Polish, Japanese, etc. And this is really going to be defining American immigration up until the mid-1960s. So you're going to see a real tightening, clamping down on immigration in general, and a very much more waspyish notion of who the immigrants should be coming in is going to look like. Now, we see probably the darkest chapter of nativism, perhaps, involving the Sacco and Vanzetti trial. Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti are going to be two Italian immigrants that are going to be facing murder charges in Boston, Massachusetts. Now, these two guys pictured here are going to be experiencing pretty much a sham of a trial. Now, trials are not perfect, and this is not to say that Sacco and Vanzetti were necessarily, innocent of the crimes that they were charged with, but the way that the courtroom was ran, with the judge, pretty blatant and obvious in terms of directing the jury to make assumptions about these two guys based on the fact that they were Italian immigrants and they were political anarchists. The basic attitude being is that, well, if you're an Italian anarchist new to this country, of course you're a threat. Of course you are dangerous to America. And of course you don't fit in with American values and sensibilities. And so what happens? These guys are found guilty and executed for a crime they may not have committed. So you are seeing, when you couple this, with the quota acts and the Palmer raids and, these things that are happening, this collective Red Scare is going to show, a dark underside to America's attitudes in terms of how we treat immigrants, how we treat people with unpopular or unusual political beliefs. Pretty rough. But maybe even rougher than what we see here in this case is the reemergence of America's most notorious terrorist group. Of course, I'm talking about the Ku Klux Klan. Now, when we talked about the Ku Klux Klan previously, the Ku Klux Klan is going to emerge originally in the post-Civil War South as an attempt to try to maintain the old Southern pre-Civil War way of life. So, in other words, trying to make sure that African Americans are at the very bottom of the social class, that Democrats maintain political control over the entire South, keeping Republicans out, keeping the carpetbaggers out, suppressing the scallywags, all that kind of, and basically trying to undo any gains in terms of helping African Americans as a result of Reconstruction. And we know that they use all sorts of horrific, brutal, evil tactics to try to achieve their goals. But thankfully, the Grant administration is going to aggressively round up leaders in the Ku Klux Klan, and the Ku Klux Klan will effectively go underground for several decades. It never truly dies, but it certainly, I would say, goes dormant for many, many years. That is until the beginning of the 20th century. Following the Spanish-American War, and there's more of a sense of unification between the North and the South, you start to see more of this romanticism of what the Confederate cause was all about. In fact, they called it at the time the lost cause idea, that, Southern Confederate rebels, they weren't, doing what they were doing to, hurt black people or, anything along those lines. It was about states' rights. It was about, asserting their values and maintaining their way of life, and that, these folks that led these Confederate armies like Lee and Stonewall Jackson and others, that they were heroes. They were real American heroes. And you started to see, Confederate monuments starting to pop up across the South, venerating this idea and, kind of championing what these guys really were about. And as this is happening, you see the release of a movie known as Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith. And this film is almost jaw-dropping in terms of what it portrays. It is basically the story of how the Ku Klux Klan is the organization that defends and looks out for the rights of white people from dangerous, barbaric people of color that will, rampage your towns and kidnap your daughters and all that kind of stuff. But for, many racist whites, including President Woodrow Wilson, who actually showed this film in the White House, viewed this as a sense of, aha, see, yes, this is, really what this is about, that they're, whites, have to be proud about being whites and use their collective power to suppress those inferior people that wish to upend the status quo, yada, yada, yada. So you've got these things kind of come together, and then add the piece of Red Scare nativism, and, fear of communism and radicalization on the left. You mold all these things together, and now you've got the environment for not just a return of the Ku Klux Klan, but a far bigger, broader, and way more powerful Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s than what we saw in the in the post-Civil War period. And when we're talking about the Ku Klux Klan and its power, I'm not joking here. We're talking about the new Ku Klux Klan. This is not the same old Ku Klux Klan that was basically limited to Southerners. This new Ku Klux Klan is a national organization with, at one point in 1925, 5 million members. I know that's startling to believe, but yes, this was a group that had, to some degree, depending on where you lived in America, some degree of mainstream, validation. In certain parts of America, joining the Ku Klux Klan was like joining the Elks Lodge or the Moose Lodge or some other fraternal organization. You can see here in this picture of Klansmen marching down Washington D.C. Through the streets of Washington D.C. that these are folks that are not afraid to hide their identity. These are proud, card-carrying, faces exposed Klansmen. And this shows the power and popularity of this group at the time. And part of what made this group popular was that it's not just targeting, Northern Republicans and Black Americans. They are targeting not just Black Americans, but many other groups that were viewed as not really American at this time period. Catholics, Jews, immigrants, leftist people politically, including communists. All of these folks that were viewed as subversive and not really American and not really patriotic, are going to be we're going to defend America from these undesirable people by joining the Ku Klux Klan. It really is going to be remarkable. Now, when we talk about, how this group's going to portray itself, take a look at this advertisement for the Klan in the 1920s. See how this new Ku Klux Klan is not just, white hoods and robes, looking to target Black Americans. They are wrapping themselves in the American flag. They are wrapping themselves in American patriotism, girded in, being the real, true, proper Christians of America, with the burning cross. And so there's this sense that, they are defending real American values. And that's what's really scary and insidious about the popularity of the 1920s. All these other negative feelings give birth to this. And of course, as the Klan has historically done, they will use horrifically violent tactics, lynchings, arson, kidnapping, and even murder in some cases. So, we see this popularity. Now, what seemed to be a trajectory of becoming even more mainstream does hit the skids by the end of the 1920s. By the end of the 1920s, we see a dramatic decline in Klan membership, not because Americans have, better sensibilities regarding race and immigration, nothing along those lines, unfortunately, but there's going to be very serious allegations of financial fraud, that the leadership was basically stealing dues money from members, and you had one of the top Klan leaders in Indiana be convicted for the rape and murder of a white woman, and that was seen as totally antithetical to the perceived values of the Ku Klux Klan. So just as quick as the Klan's popularity grows, it goes into pretty steep decline. Now, the Klan does not totally go away. It still is going to be popular in certain pockets of America, especially the South, especially in rural areas, and of course it still exists to this day in far more diminished numbers. But understand that the Klan's heyday is in the 1920s, and there are very clear reasons for why that's the case. So we will leave it there. We'll see you there. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.